The Russian war machine is no longer running on a surplus. It is running on borrowed time. For the first time since the 2022 invasion, the Kremlin has been forced to announce a real terms cut in national defense funding. Moscow's 2026 budget reveals a desperate pivot. They are slashing military spending by 4% in nominal terms, while inflation is set to evaporate what's left. The oil piggy bank that sustained the invasion for 4 years has finally hit a wall. Russia's budget deficit has exploded to nearly 7 trillion rubles, double what was originally planned. To keep the front lines from collapsing, the government is now cannibalizing its own citizens. Taxes on small businesses are skyrocketing, and the national VAT has been hiked to 22%. This isn't just an economic slowdown, it's a full-blown fiscal crisis. Investment is projected to contract for the first time in the war's history. The Kremlin is openly choosing between feeding its soldiers and feeding its people. And in 2026, the math shows they can no longer do both. The depth of this fiscal crater is staggering. By early 2026, Russia's oil and gas revenues, which once made up over 50% of the state budget, have plummeted to just 23%. Moscow is being forced to sell its crude at break-even prices, often losing money on every barrel shipped to Asia due to massive desperation discounts. This revenue collapse is the reason the Kremlin has targeted the middle class with the 22% VAT. It is a survival tax, designed to extract an additional 1.2 trillion rubles from a population that is already seeing their real wages stagnate for the 7th consecutive month. As Russia's economy enters this death spiral, the West has moved from aid to execution. Just yesterday, in the halls of the Élysée Palace, the Paris trap was officially sprung. France, the United Kingdom, and Ukraine signed a binding declaration of intent that fundamentally rewrites the rules of the war. This isn't a NATO operation bogged down by red tape. This is a coalition of the willing, a lethal, multinational force designed to bypass the UN veto. Leaked intelligence from the summit confirms a planned deployment of 15,000 elite troops. These aren't observers. They are tripwire forces. By establishing security hubs across Ukrainian territory, London and Paris have installed a permanent Western shield. If the Kremlin launches a single strike on these hubs, they are no longer attacking Kiev. They are declaring war on the nuclear powers of Europe. The legal Ghost Protocol is now active. It requires no UN approval and no further debate. For Putin, the 15,000 troop deployment is an unsolvable variable in his attack algorithm. The cage is locked, and for the first time, Moscow has no way to vote it down. While the 15,000 troops provide the physical tripwire, the real execution is happening in the electromagnetic spectrum. In January 2026, the first units of the SAMP-T, the next-generation air defense shield, officially went operational on Ukrainian soil. This is not just another missile battery, it is a technological cage. Anchored by the Groundfire 300 radar, this system possesses a surveillance range of over 400 kilometers. To a Russian pilot, the sky has just become a death trap. The SAMP-T doesn't just wait for a missile to be fired. Its K-band active seeker can track high-speed, low-signature targets with surgical precision. In late 2025, Russian Iskander missiles began using terminal phase maneuvers to bypass Western defenses. But the 2026 deployment of the SAMP-T has solved that algorithm. The new Ka-band radar seeker replaces the older Ku-band systems, providing a much higher resolution that allows it to see through Moscow's most advanced electronic jamming. French military assessments confirm that this system is now outperforming the Patriot against Russia's most advanced hypersonic threats. The strategy is clear. The West is establishing air superiority hubs that blind the Russian Air Force the moment they leave the tarmac. By integrating these sensors with the 15,000 elite troops on the ground, the Paris trap has created a zone where Russian aggression is met with instant, automated neutralization. Putin's Air Force, once the pride of the Kremlin, is being rendered obsolete by a digital wall they cannot climb. The sugar rush of Russia's wartime spending has officially worn off. Inside the 2026 budget, the Kremlin is admitting something their propaganda never will. The money is running out. For the first time since the invasion began, funding for national defense is facing a real terms cut. To fill the massive 7 trillion ruble hole, Moscow is now turning its back on its own people. Beginning this week, the national VAT has been hiked to 22%. Small businesses, the backbone of the civilian economy, are being crushed by new taxes to feed the military-industrial complex. But the real silent killer is the interest rate, now frozen at a staggering 16% to prevent the ruble from total collapse. Energy revenues, which once accounted for half of Russia's state income, have plummeted by 34% year-on-year. The National Wealth Fund, Putin's ultimate safety net, has been drained to its lowest liquid levels in history. By early 2026, the NWF's liquid assets have dropped to just $50 billion, a fraction of the $113 billion it held before the invasion. Moscow has been forced to sell off nearly 50% of its gold reserves just to cover the monthly deficit. Russia is no longer a superpower. It is a giant whose internal organs are failing while it tries to maintain a tough exterior. In 2026, the Kremlin isn't fighting for victory anymore, it is fighting for survival. The story of 2026 is not about a stalemate, it is about the end of an era. Between the Paris trap closing the sky and the fiscal collapse draining the treasury, the Kremlin has hit a wall it cannot climb. The 15,000 Western troops on the ground have effectively paralyzed Russia's conventional options. If Putin escalates, he loses his economy. If he stays, he loses his army. The myth of the unstoppable Russian superpower has been dismantled by the cold logic of Western technology and the brutal reality of a bankrupt budget. As we move deeper into this year, the question is no longer, will Ukraine hold? The question is, how long can the Kremlin survive the cage they built for themselves? But don't be fooled. While the headlines focus on the 15,000 troops, the real destruction of the Russian state is happening in the shadows where the public can't see it. To understand why Moscow is truly panicking, we have to look at the classified data that the Kremlin tried to bury. Because the fiscal collapse is only the beginning. For decades, the Kremlin has treated the United Nations Security Council as its personal shield. By using its permanent veto power, Moscow could paralyze any international effort to stop its aggression. But in January 2026, the West finally stopped playing by the Kremlin's rules. During the high-stakes Paris summit, a new legal architecture was born. It's called the Coalition of the Willing, Declaration of Intent. This isn't a NATO treaty that requires a 32-nation consensus. And it isn't a UN resolution that Russia can block. Instead, it is a series of bilateral, legally binding agreements between Ukraine, France, and the United Kingdom. This is the Ghost Protocol. By framing the deployment of 15,000 troops as a direct invitation from a sovereign nation for security assistance, London and Paris have effectively removed the UN from the equation. The Kremlin's legal team in Moscow is now facing a nightmare scenario. They cannot veto a contract between two independent countries. This Paris trap has turned Russia's greatest diplomatic strength into a useless piece of paper. The 15,000 troops aren't there as peacekeepers under a blue UN flag. They are there as a multinational force with a clear mandate to establish military hubs and protected facilities. If Moscow attempts to challenge this in court, they are already too late. The legal framework is active, the signatures are dry, and the troops have a clear right of self-defense that triggers the moment a Russian shell lands near their perimeter. The most dangerous threat to the Kremlin isn't coming from the front lines, it's coming from within the luxury compounds of Moscow. As the Paris trap locks the military and the ruble liquidation starves the banks, the internal loyalty of Russia's elite is hitting a terminal breaking point. For 2 decades, the deal was simple. The Kremlin provided stability, and the oligarchs provided loyalty. In 2026, that deal is dead. Leaked communications suggest a silent rebellion is brewing among the billionaire class. These are men who have watched their global assets be frozen, their yachts seized, and now, more importantly, their internal influence eroded by the state's desperate 22% VAT hike. The oligarch exodus of 2026 is about pulling support from the regime. Intelligence reports indicate that key figures in the energy and tech sectors are now moving their capital into off-grid assets, effectively starving the Kremlin of the local investment it needs to survive. The story of 2026 is the story of a checkmate decades in the making. The myth of the unstoppable Russian superpower has been dismantled not by a single invasion, but by the cold, calculated logic of Western technology and the brutal reality of a bankrupt budget. Moscow is no longer a global architect. It is a prisoner of its own aggression. For the first time in modern history, the global map is being redrawn by a coalition of the willing that has proven they no longer need the Kremlin's permission to act. As we look toward the remainder of 2026, the question is no longer, will the Kremlin win? The question is, what will be left of Russia when the cage finally closes? The game is over. The superpower is gone. And the world is finally moving on. Russia is facing a crisis it cannot spend its way out of. And the 2026 data proves it. But what do you think? Is the Paris trap the final move? Or does the Kremlin have one last desperate card to play in Moscow? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If you found this deep dive, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to join our community of strategic thinkers. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.